Welcome to the Man Up God's Way podcast, a show that dives into the real, raw, and relevant issues for men in their faith, life, and community. Now, your host, Jody Burkeen.
And here we are on another Monday night at the Man Up podcast. And man, we're just glad that you guys are joining us. My name is Jody Burkeen. I'm your host and the founder of Man Up God's Way Men's Ministry, an international men's ministry that was birthed out of a desire to see men do Christianity instead of just talk about it and just sit in the proverbial back row of the church. And so our podcast is growing each week, and we just want you to take an opportunity right now to hit the like button, the subscribe button, share this podcast. It's live on Monday nights, and then we will launch a download for all podcast platforms later on tonight that will be available with Jesus, that will mirror the relationship that they have with their spouse. And then hopefully, because they have become one flesh, their parenting will become better. They can become better fathers as well. And then that gives them a unified and a household that is in order. And so they can start serving in the church and start leading in the church. And that will make a difference at work. You know, then they can start being the men that God has called them to be, and not the dirty old man sitting at the water cooler telling dirty jokes, but a guy that people look for to come alongside and just have pray for them. And then we want them to have an accountability partner and learn to be discipled as well as make disciples. So that's what Man Up God's Way is all about. Ben, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. I didn't think I was going to make it. I spent all day yesterday in an airport, and I was wondering if I was ever going to get out of Dallas, but I'm here.
Oh, no,
I'm glad. So thank God.
Glad you made it. Was it weather or just
it was the weather here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, it was the weather here. We were supposed to leave at like 7:35. They grounded planes. They diverted planes coming into Dallas down to Austin for a while, and then they had to fly back in and pick us up. So we ended up having about a 4.5 hour delay, which put us in at 2:30 this morning. So.
Yeah, you'll be dead tonight.
Yes, I will.
You'll be dead tonight. Well, in the back, we've got Fregosa. Fregosa, how you doing, brother?
What it do?
Awesome.
Always doing well.
Glad you're here. Gabe, my son, how you doing, brother?
Doing pretty good.
Good. Glad you're here tonight, too. I've also got my little son back here, Paul. Paul doesn't have a mic, but he's waving. He says hi. He's cheesing at everybody. So really excited about tonight's podcast. I got a special guest tonight I'll introduce here in just a minute. But really quick, some marketing that we've got going on. If you get an opportunity, you can check out our manupmerch.com. It's our website that has all of our t-shirts, our hats, coffee mugs, coffee subscription service. This is real bean coffee. I wish you could smell it, man. It is awesome. It smells great, and it's a great blend that we have. We've got water bottles. We've got books. My book's right there on the table. You can pick up at Amazon as well. And so that's our marketing.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, t-shirts, sweatshirts.
T-shirts, sweatshirts.
The good thing about the t-shirts and the sweatshirts is it's sure to start up a conversation. In fact, when I wear mine out, you will get more women walking right by their husband that'll say something like, "Hey, I really like that shirt," and I always take it as they're giving their husband some type of a underlying message,
exactly.
Right? Maybe that's just me, but
it's kind of like when your wife gave you my Man Up book.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, bro.
Just a minute, but next week we've got Jonathan Lutz, a personal trainer, a Christian man that reached out to me a few weeks ago, and man, we've been talking back and forth, and gonna have him on here maybe to get us excited about our weight program that we're doing, the biggest losing program, because I'm struggling with it right now. So hopefully he'll give us a kick in the butt. But tonight, I'm excited to introduce to you guys retired Lieutenant Colonel Chaplain Jerry Owens, and he is with us on Zoom. How you doing, Jerry?
Good tonight. Great to be here.
Well, man, I'm so glad to have you here. I'm excited to talk about your military career. You had, how many years did you have?
28 years of active service.
28 years of active service. Holy cow. Wow, that's amazing. I appreciate your service, and thank you for all that you've sacrificed for our country, and it's an honor to have you here tonight.
Thanks for the patriotism of the American people.
Amen. Yes. Amen. So how I met Chaplain Jerry through my school. I started going back to school last year at Williamson College and trying to get my degree in biblical leadership and my master's in theology. So it's a combined program that I'm doing. It's kind of I wouldn't call it a fast track, but it's fast. I mean, I'm doing one class every 5 weeks that, it's 4 hours every week. And so I had the pleasure of having Chaplain Jerry as my professor last semester, and we went through the book of Acts. And so this was the beginning, really close to the beginning of the year. And I had just come out of my elders retreat, and I had already planned out my sermon series for the year. And I thought, man, this is where God's leading me. And I was going to start with the book of Romans for 2022. And, man, I was all geared up for it because it's a very doctrinal book. You can get into a lot of deep theology through that, and I was really excited about it. I'd been studying it, and I'd just gone through all the Pauline epistles through my previous in 2021 school. But, man, Chaplain Jerry and I started talking about Acts, and our vision for our church in 2022 was mission and community. And, man, Acts just really, fit right into our mission. And Romans would have been good, but man, starting with Acts just really kicked in. And so that's how you and I met, Chaplain. And man, we just had a great 5 weeks. I loved having your class. You're knowledgeable. Your Greek is amazing. Your history is even more amazing. And I appreciate all that you taught me in those 5 weeks. And thank you for joining us again tonight. I can't wait to get into the discussion.
Sure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your life, 28 years in the military. I know there's a million stories that we can probably get into, and I do want to get into some of those, especially as a chaplain. You know, I was in the Army in 1990. As a matter of fact, I think you and I were at Fort Riley, Kansas at the same time, or pretty close at the same time, because we were talking about Timothy McVeigh, and was he in your battalion?
He was 2nd Battalion, 216th Infantry.
Okay, so I was in the Cav Scout, and I was like 2 battalions over. I was actually in at the same time he was, and you were there at the same time. It was kind of a really small world. We'll talk a little bit about that too as well. But tell us your salvation story, how you came to know the Lord, and then walk us all the way up to the time that you joined the Army, and then we'll hop into your military career.
Okay. Well, and I'll start in a foxhole in Iraq as a way of reflecting back on really God's call on my life and how I knew him from a very young man. I had been out traveling, visiting the soldiers and doing services. I came back late that night at Camp Talon. And there was the only place I could have some privacy just to kind of pray and kind of renew my strength was in the little dark foxhole outside my tent. And so I go down in there at night and press my face up against the sand on that foxhole. And that was my prayer location.
Okay.
When you're surrounded by about 2,000 soldiers all day long and all night long, you got to find a place to be alone with God. And so one night I was there, and in my prayer, I was just thinking about my early life. And I realized how God had prepared me for my mission to be an Army chaplain and to serve a lot of years with infantry and combat arms and then being deployed for war. And, if God and going to prepare somebody for that mission, the first thing I'd give him was this kind of macho dad. My dad, 8 brothers, grew up on a farm in Arkansas. If they weren't playing sports or baling hay and, out roping the cattle, they were fighting.
Right.
So they were all pugilists. And so as a young man, very young, age 5, before I went off to kindergarten to 1st grade, Dad had me trained. So I walked into school, knew how to defend myself. It was expected. Now, Dad was a man of faith. He went to church, and he was a man of prayer. but his relationship with God was fairly distant. Real, and he was he was a good moral man, so he was a great example to me. But he expected all of me, and then pray over him afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I always say lay hands on him in Jesus' name. Yeah.
Dad taught me to lay hands on him in Jesus' name. So that was a part of my life, and that needed to be there because heck, when I showed up with the infantry, they expected their chaplain to be out there with them doing everything.
Right.
And my mom's side, it was a family of preachers. My grandfather was a preacher. All my uncles on my mom's side. And, my mom was very active in the local church. So, she taught me to pray. Dad taught me to fight. So I was just kind of reflecting on that as I was in the foxhole that night. And, that still small voice saying, sorry, I had to kind of do that with your dad. But it was an important part of your training to get you ready.
Wow.
David had to kill the bears and the lions when he was guarding the sheep. God was getting them ready for Goliath. And so God was getting me ready for my time serving. I mean, our first 11 years were mostly with combat arms units.
Wow.
So now I'll jump back then to a young man of age 5 in a Pentecostal church in Cordell, Oklahoma, where Dad was stationed. Dad was in the Air Force for 20 years. And so I was used to moving around. Mom would take me to her church, Assemblies of God Church. Dad would take me to the Church of Christ Church. We'd alternate Sunday nights, Sunday mornings. And we'd go to the military chapel on Sunday morning. And then 6 months, we'd go to Assembly of God Church. And then we'd switch and go 6 months to Church of Christ.
Now, your dad was in the military as well?
I was Air Force. He was in the civilian branch of the military. So he asked me why I didn't coach my son's baseball team. And I said, Dad, I don't get home at 3:30.
That sounded like a shot from across the bow.
Yeah, there you go. So we can start it now. We got to have a branch rivalry or it's no fun, So, instead of walking into a bar and turn over our shot glass, we'll turn over our Bibles.
There you
That'll
go.
be the sign. So anyway, so even that was a part of my future as an Army chaplain because I was being exposed to the military chapels and then Church of Christ, Assemblies of God. And so I was getting a different perspective when it came to the practical working out of the Bible, interpretation of the Bible and applying it practically to your life. So at a very young age, I was active in the local church. I had a vibrant personal prayer life that came again more from my mother than my father. Although again, my dad was always a strong moral man, always faithful to my mom. You could always trust him to be an honest man, keep his word. So that stayed with me my entire life. And then when I got into my senior year of high school, it was an important time for me to reevaluate my own faith so that I just didn't inherit the faith of my parents.
Right.
And so as I was exposed to a few of my teachers and then later some of my junior college professors, they really challenged my view of Genesis 1:1. And I had to begin to wrestle with Darwin's Origin of the Species and, the theory of evolution. And so there was an important time where I wanted to believe. It wasn't like I was running from God and wanting to go out and live, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Right. I just genuinely wanted to believe, but I had lost that foundation temporarily. And so I spent about 2 years. I can remember going to bed and saying, God, I want to believe. I want to believe that you are there and that your word is true, but I'm just not sure. And so it was really a prayer of I believe, but help my unbelief.
Yeah.
And so for 2 years, I really went through a deep searching. And I asked other people. I talked to an imam and a rabbi, and I had atheist professors that I sat down and I said, okay, you've challenged my faith. What do you believe? And they would take off on some ridiculous chase that made no sense at all. And I'm like, you believe that?
Yeah.
That takes more faith than it does for me to believe that there's a loving God who designed the world. And so anyway, after a period of a couple of years, I was able to once again firmly accept the revealed word in my own experience with God. In my own life.
That's great. I love what you said a while ago is that, I've even taught my kids this, is there's going to be a certain time that they're going to have to figure out who Jesus is in their life and not just daddy's Jesus.
Yes.
I've taught them the understanding of the Bible and even some religion and a relationship with Jesus that I have. But, for most teenagers, most kids, they're going to have to figure out who Jesus is to them. And I've seen that both in my older kids' lives, and I've still got twin 11-year-olds that I will probably see that as well, because they've got to come to that realization that, they're a blind or a childlike faith. They're following their dad until they realize, okay, oh, that's who Jesus is. And I think that's what you were saying that you had, and I think that's cool. And sometimes parents don't need to worry so much about getting to, sometimes their kids, if you raise the bar for your kids, when they do fall, it's not near as far. So, keep good high morals for them, good boundaries for them, good, and then when they do fall, like you can see when they're, and I say fall, but just even in your case, you were searching. You were like, okay, I'm hearing something that contradicts the word that I heard. Okay, this is interesting to me. Let me figure this out, because sin is fun for a season, and when you can kind of, justify everything that you're doing, it can lead you astray. And I love that, that you just have to figure out your own Jesus sometimes.
And that wisdom needs to be shared more with Christian parents, because you see it all the time. You go to a church, and you've been in a church for a while, and you see these parents that are raising these kids, and they believe in Jesus, but the belief is really, it's what they've been exposed to all this time. And these parents are just sideswiped when their kids start struggling, and they don't understand it. And they're going to have their own walk and their own testimony.
And I think a lot of times the Proverbs verse, train your child up in the way that should go, and they will not depart from you. That's a premise. That's not a promise.
That's right.
Like that a lot of times they're taught that that's a promise. And then all of a sudden you see, these kids walk away from God, and it's like, that's not the promise. The promise is that the premise is most likely if you train them, they will not depart, or they won't go far from it. So.
Yeah, and it sounds like, Jerry, it sounds like you didn't go far. You were just kind of questioning.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a case of me not wanting to believe.
Right.
And I'm also thankful that I had a mother, especially, who allowed me to explore those questions, and was willing for me to ask questions and us to dialogue. We had kind of a relationship. And so it wasn't a case of me wanting to kind of explore the sensual side of life, or, was that age for a young man to kind of, in fact, I'll tell you, my senior year of high school on the football team, one Friday night after a game, all the guys around the locker room were bragging about what they were going to be doing that weekend with their girlfriends. And they were getting pretty explicit. And I had been dating a girl from my home church. We've been dating about a year. So the quarterback turns to me and says, "Hey, how about you, Owens?" And I'm like, "Well, Jay, to be honest, I'm not sleeping with my girlfriend." And the whole team surrounded me. 40 guys surround me, and they're making fun of me, and I won't tell you everything they said, but, bottom line was, I was like, guys, honestly, I believe that sexual intimacy is for the lifetime commitment of marriage. And so for me, I'm going to wait until I've met the right girl, and we make that commitment to each other. And they were all like, "Oh, you're crazy." And I got the nickname Spaceman after that. Oh. The rest of that year, my nickname was Spaceman.
Because you're from outer space?
Yeah, I was from outer space. In Southern California in 1977, there was a very different culture there. So even as I was struggling with the certainty of my faith, I still had the teaching of my parents and the scripture that was there to help protect me. And what's interesting is some of those friends have since called me and they said, Jerry, you were right, because they're on their second, third, fourth marriage. And 40 years into my marriage, because those foundations were laid and protected, those boundaries protected my life. So,
praise God. That's awesome.
You know what's funny about that story you just told is that I was listening to a sermon one time by Alistair Begg, and he was talking about Ephesians 5. And he said, I want you to pick, he goes, you could pick the most important corporate meeting that you'll ever go into. And you can go into that meeting and dress like a Viking. And you will not get the type of negative response that you will if you walked into that meeting and you looked at everybody and said, I'm going to love my wife like Christ loves the church, or I'm going to submit to my husband. Right. He said they will extricate you. Yeah, exactly. It's just funny because it sounds just like the story you just told.
That's good. Yeah.
Well, the rest of that story was then the following Monday we saw a film, and then Tuesday we have scrimmage. And I was still mad from Friday night. I mean, the thing they said about me, I was just, angry. And so I was a heat-seeking missile. I just wanted to hit somebody. And so about a third of the way through practice, the coach calls everybody again. He said, Owens, come over here. He said, man, you're playing some good football today. What is going on? And I told him what happened Friday night. So he pulls the whole team together. He says, every Friday night, I want you to make fun of Owens.
So funny.
That's great.
It's kind of like The Water Boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember the movie The Water Boy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So
that's good.
So the next kind of, in terms of formation of my faith, as I was in my senior year of high school, I always loved math and science. And so I was contacted by the Air Force to see if I wanted to take a 4-year scholarship through the ROTC program at the Air Force and go to an engineering school. And my parents were middle class and were going to have a tough time helping with college. So that seemed a great way to do it. And so I sign up, and I tell my parents, and they're like, you're only going to be 17 when you start your freshman year of college. And they said, why don't you take 1 year at junior college first? I'm like, Mom, Dad, they're going to pay for my college. They're like, well, see if they'll start you as a sophomore. So I call up my recruiter. He says, absolutely. We'd love you to start as a sophomore. You save us a year of your tuition, and we get to look at you for a year. We want you to take physics and calculus your freshman year,
right.
Show us you can at least pull a B there, and then you can come in as a sophomore. So I said, okay. I tell my parents that, that works. And so my dad, who worked for the Wyoming School District after he retired from the military, got me a job they had a program where if you worked from roughly 4 to 7:30 at night, you got a decent chunk of change when you're living at home. And then I'd go to school during the day. So that was the plan. Well, I'd be working there alone at night at Haycox Elementary School, cleaning all the rooms, sweeping all the rooms. And I would play tapes of the Bible or Christian music or Fiddler on the Roof, whatever. I'd play something. And I began to have this conversation. And I began to argue with God, saying, I don't want to be a preacher. It just doesn't fit me. No way. And I tell my mom, and she says, well, who's asking you to be a preacher? I'm like, well, I hadn't really thought of that. She says, well, ask. Tomorrow when that voice comes, ask. Say, God, is this you? And so I did, and I realized that God was asking me to do something other than go in the Air Force. And so talked with my pastor, talked with my parents, and I made a decision to go to Bible college up in Santa Cruz Mountains, Bethany Bible College. And it was there that I began to wrestle with going into full-time ministry. So then an important thing happened was one of my professors, and I think I shared this with you, Professor Rick Howard,
right,
pastor in California. He said, if you can do anything else with your life, be a full-time pastor, do it.
Yeah.
So, I'm sitting in class, I'm like, he means that. So I invite him out for lunch, and I ask him if he really means that. And Professor Howard looks at me. He says, Jerry, you're going to make a decision based upon how I answer this, aren't you? I said, yes, sir. He lowered his head, and I could kind of see him thinking, praying. He looked up with tears in his eyes, and he says, Jerry, if you could do anything else with your life but be a full-time, go into full-time ministry, he said, do it. I said, all right. So I called my soon-to-be fiance and told her about the conversation. And so I applied with the Air Force to be a navigator. Coming out of Bible college, I applied with the Air Force. And so I come home, get married, and I'm waiting to hear from the Air Force. They say no.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, they say no. So my wife's working at Bank of America. I'm working for the school district. The Marine Corps calls me up, and they say, would you like to be an officer of Marines? I'm like, excuse me? They said, well, the Air Force sent us your packet. And I said, well, why would you want me? I went to Bible college. They didn't train me at Bible college how to kill people. And I baptized them if you want. But they're like, no. It says here you're lettered in football and baseball, and you're not very smart. That's what we're looking for, athletic and dumb.
There's the next jab.
Yeah, I got the Marine Corps now. I've hit the Air Force. I've hit the Marine Corps. So
that's awesome.
So I signed up. I literally signed up. I went down. He took me out and had me run 3 miles and had to do it in 21 minutes or less, the whole thing. Had to do the Marine Corps physical. And my wife comes home from work, and I said, guess what, honey? I just joined the Marine Corps.
Oh,
She's like, he said, don't you think you should talk to me about this kind of stuff? No, I'm the head of this house. What are you? No.
Yeah.
Train me yet at that point. So I'm running to work. I leave my car at the home. I run to my job. It's a couple miles. I run back. I'm working out, getting ready to leave for officer training school. And it's now Friday night. I'm supposed to leave for officer training school on Monday. And my wife and I go to bed that night. She falls asleep. And I'm laying in bed, and a sermon just starts running through my mind. But I mean, it's just, I got the introduction, the 3 points. I'm thinking of the conclusion. I'm like, what is going on? I get up and go into the living room. I'm behind the couch there. And it's one of those wrestling matches to where I feel God saying, I need you to go to seminary, be a chaplain. And I'm like, well, Lord, I just signed a contract with the Marine Corps. And so we wrestled a little bit more. And finally I said, okay, God, if you get me out of that, I'll quit my job. I'll talk to my wife first this time.
Yeah.
And go off to seminary.
That's chapter 1 in the Man Up book, Jerry, just so you know.
So she wakes up Saturday morning, and I said, I had the most unusual conversation last night. I believe God is asking me to go to be a chaplain, but I said, I let him know I've got a contract with the Marine Corps, as if he didn't know. I know he was surprised. And she says, well, what does it mean? And I said, I don't know what it means. I guess it means I leave on Monday to go to the Marine Corps. The phone rings. Literally, after that conversation, within 6 minutes, it's my recruiter. He said, I need you to come down here and sign a new contract. I'm like, excuse me? I go on Monday. He said, well, since you were signed up later, meaning, we didn't really want you that bad, but you were at the bottom of the barrel, and we need you to come and sign a new contract because your school has been moved for 3 months later because they cut the quotas in half. And I said, are you telling me that my contract is now null and void? And then he started kind of getting mad at me. And he's like, well, yes, that's why you need to come down there and sign a new one. I said, well, you're not going to understand this, but I'm not going to be able to do that. And then he said things about my mama that are not true. I turned to my wife and she said, who was that? I said, that was the Marine Corps. My contract is broken and I'm not going to sign a new one because, honey, we're going to Springfield, Missouri to go to seminary because that's where the Assemblies of God Commission on Chaplains is located. That's where our seminary is. And so that was it. That was how. And so, again, what I would say is first off, I wanted to be obedient. It was never a case of me trying to run from God. It was my heart's desire to really do what I felt he was asking me to do in life. And I just kept making decisions as I went along. And he just kind of, you could just tell he would just turn the wheel whichever direction it needed to go.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I went from just, coming from a home that, rather than saying they were Christians, I would say they were Christ followers. I prefer that term.
That's good. So
Action.
So you came from California to Springfield. You finished seminary, and then is that when you went into the Army?
Here's what it takes to be a military chaplain. You have to do your undergraduate. You have to get a Master's of Divinity, which normally takes about 2 to 3 years, depending on where you go and what you did for your undergraduate work. Then you are required to go serve as a senior pastor for 2 years.
Oh my goodness!
So it takes about 9 years to be a chaplain. So it's a long course, and that's why maybe God doesn't really ask you to do it till the end. Because if He asked you at the beginning, you'd be like, 9 years.
Yeah.
That's a pharmacist.
Yeah.
It's like a pharmacist. So it's one step at a time guidance, so that you don't get discouraged. So
are you a senior?
So as we were coming,
I was going to say. So was it 2 year senior pastor on base?
yes.
Okay.
No.
Oh.
At the church. So, I'm 26 when I graduate from seminary. The Assemblies of God have about 3 ministers for every church. So, when you're 26 years old looking to be a senior pastor of the Assemblies of God church, good luck on that one.
Right.
That's going to take a miracle. Well, I did get one of those events. And so I took a home missions church in Morro Bay, California. And that's an interesting story in itself, but I'll save that for another time. How's that?
That sounds good. Wow.
So we went there for years, and my poor wife, who did not go to Bible college and seminary and had just grown up in the church, she was shocked when at age 24 she is now the pastor's wife. She was not ready for that.
Yeah, I don't think any wife is ready for it. Your professor who asked you, or told you if you could ever find another job outside of being a full-time pastor. I mean, I get why he says that. It's not an easy job. It's not for everybody that needs to step up. There are people who are called to preach, but they're not called to pastor. And there's a big difference there. And even bigger is the wife that's behind you. Like that's key. I mean, if it wasn't for my wife, there's no way I'd make it. Number one. And I can't imagine her being 24 years old and stepping into, the pastor's wife at that age. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine the stories you guys have from that.
It was an interesting 2 years, to say the least. And again, they were great people, and a lot of them understood. I was honest with them up front. I see, the district official who said, when you go try out for that church, don't tell them you're only planning on staying 2 years. And I was like, no, sir, I want to be honest with them up front. And most of them were like, yeah, we're glad you're only going to be here 2 years. So that's a plus. That can put you out of here in 2 years. And there were some people in the church that really took me under their wing, and they had been elders and helped plant churches. And now they were retired, and some of them in their 70s and 80s. And they took me under their wing and were very kind and loving. And then, as God well intended, I had to deal with the dragons, the well-intended dragons, who took every opportunity to find a way to insult me or criticize me. I'll tell you the best one, just one. Brother Frank Wild, retired Marine from Arkansas, is retired and living in Morro Bay, California. Every Sunday, he would give me a good solid critique. That's something I did. So I finally go active duty, Fort Riley, Kansas. So now it's 2 years later. He calls me up from California and he says, I'm going to be passing through. Can we stay the night with you guys at Fort Riley, Kansas? I'm like, sure, Frank, Brother Frank, come on. So he stays, him and his wife, Tulip, Battle Axe Tulip. I mean, she was as broad as she was tall. And, he was a true Pentecostal, no makeup, hair in a bun. wearing the gunny sack. I mean, she was,
Oh my goodness.
Pilgrim's life. And so they show up at Fort Riley, stay with us, and he comes to church with me. He comes to the chapel Sunday morning. We're walking out of the chapel, and I turn to Brother Frank. I say, Frank, how's your new pastor working out? He says, Jerry, he reminds me a lot of you. Can't preach his way out of a paper bag. I'm like, Frank, only you would drive halfway across the United States to insult me.
Just insult you. Oh my goodness.
Oh, I love you, Pastor Owens. I'm like, yeah, with love like that, man. Who needs enemies?
It's right.
I had an old guy come up to me one time. He handed me his watch, and he said, put this on the pulpit because you can't seem to figure out what time you're supposed to quit preaching. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, they come at you hard, don't they?
I'm switching into some of the chapel stories. I had a retired sergeant major when I was at Fort Lee, Virginia. And, he expected a service to be over in 60 minutes, not 60 minutes and 5 seconds, 60 minutes. And so in this chapel, you would have to go down the center, up toward the pulpit, turn left to go down and get your donuts and coffee after the service. And so no matter who was preaching or whatever the service, he would always get up just a couple more minutes before the service was supposed to end and make a lot of noise. He'd stand up, walk right down the middle of that church with about 250 people, turn left, walk in front of the pulpit, look up, like, and so let's wrap this thing up and go down and get his donuts. So I'm thinking, how do I deal with this? What's the strategy here? So I wait. I know he's getting ready to get up. I wait. Just as he stands up and starts, I give an altar call.
Oh, there you go. That'll set him down real quick.
The whole church, they were laughing so hard they were crying. Sergeant Major, I'm glad you stood up. The sinners are coming forward. Awesome.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So you finished seminary, and then you
Pastored 2 years.
Okay, so you pastored 2 years. All right, and then you finished that, and you followed the plan that
what happened was you have to get endorsed, so you have to be ordained, and you're already commissioned as a reserve. I was a reserve Air Force chaplain because doing what my dad did, and then you go back to get endorsed for active duty. So Pam and I flew to Springfield, Missouri. We meet with the chaplain board, and they have Navy, Air Force, Army, and then they have a Marine Corps, which is Department of the Navy, but it's still, they kind of have their own recruiter. They ask you go in before the board. It's very intimidating, and you go in there and they ask you, okay, what do you believe God is calling you to? And I said, well, I'll be honest. I'm going to choose Air Force because I really believe they treat the family better. I know the Army and Marine Corps are tougher on your family, and certainly Navy with your 6 months out and back. And they really like Pam. And then they said, well, what are you doing right now? And I said, well, I'm senior pastor of a church. And they said, you are right now? I said, yes, sir. That's what I'm required to do. They said, well, the last 3 guys that just came through are youth pastors or assistant pastors, and they still want to be endorsed. I'm like, okay, you guys are in charge, not me. And they said, and then the Navy guy says, well, would you consider the Navy? And then the Marine Corps guy says, how about the Marine Corps? And the Army guy says, what about the Army? I'm like, I thought you just had to choose one. They said, well, you do. I said, well, then I choose Air Force. And so Pam and I get up to go, and they say, we're going to endorse you for all 4 of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They said, so you can decide whichever one comes open first. If that's what you want to do it. I'm like, can you do that? They said, well, we're in charge. I said, okay.
That's
so I go back.
That's awesome.
So, I go back to California. I finish up my last couple of months there. I get a call from the Army, and they say, we need somebody at Fort Riley, Kansas. We need an infantry chaplain, and can you do it? I said, I turned to my wife. I said, are you ready to be in the Army? And she's thinking to herself, well, I've been in combat for 2 years here at this church. I might as well.
She's prepared, yeah. Now, how did you have to go? You didn't have to go through boot camp or officer candidate school or anything?
called Chaplain Officer Basic Course, CHOBIC.
Okay.
So you go to CHOBIC for a couple months. They get you show up with a uniform, and all the people in charge are just hoping that you can get from the bus to where you're supposed to be without doing something stupid. They just tell you, salute anything that moves.
Right.
That's funny.
Get off the bus. You're just saluting while trying to get to where you're supposed to be, and then they start telling you, because you don't know very much.
So I'm thinking, now I understand where the military is now today. Back then, I mean, was it still kind of an evangelical mindset for chaplains? Because now you've got a hodgepodge of everything.
At that point, the Army had just gone to what was called forward thrust doctrine.
Okay.
And chaplains were now being assigned down to the battalion level. Before that, like Vietnam, they were assigned at regimental level. So a regiment, usually 2 to 3 battalions, and you'd have a regimental chaplain who would just kind of float among those 3 battalions. And the Army was like, no, we need chaplains down embedded into the battalion, training with them, doing PT with them, jumping out of birds with them, whatever the soldiers were doing with chaplains down in there. And so suddenly the gates exploded where they were needing a bunch of chaplains. And that was when I was coming on active duty. And so that really changed even the way we train chaplains. So suddenly they had to give us what they call greener. They had to teach us how to integrate into an operational, battlefield. We needed to know how to move and how to communicate, how to know what was going on, left, right, flank, forward, how to move. We got Humvees, night vision goggles. I'd let the soldiers camo me up, and they'd always draw a cross. After they camoed my whole face, they'd put a cross on my forehead. But cool. Up until then, there had been quotas. In other words, you would take the percentage of churches in America and the population of those people attending, and you would say, okay, we can have 24 Baptist and 8 Pentecost. It was a quota system. But once we went to forward thrust, they were like, we just need chaplains. So anybody who's got the education and got the experience and is willing to go get shot at, yes, we'll take them. And so we suddenly went up to 1,500 chaplains in the Army at that point.
And it's pretty much all denominations and faiths, right?
All faiths. And and in fact, if you kind of want to transition and start talking about the chaplaincy in particular. So what I learned at the chaplain officer basic course, what they're wanting to teach us first is how to read a 5-paragraph operations order and understand the mission of a division and each of the units within the division, how we operate a platoon, company, battalion level, task force level. So they need to get us smart on all that. And since I had a love of history and I love wargaming as a hobby, for me, that was all exciting. I loved all that. Some of the chaplains not as much, but for me, that was it was like hitting the sweet spot on the baseball bat when we were doing all that. When they put us through the obstacle course, and then they put us through a course where they were calling in pyrotechnics, so you had explosions all around you, and they were firing machine guns, above us, so we knew not to stay unless we wanted a very short career. And,
exactly. The tracer rounds. Yeah, that I remember those.
I'm like, this is awesome, man. They're paying me to do this. So I'm doing all that. But then they start trying to explain to us our mission as chaplains in a unit. And, one of the things is we're the crisis intervention guys. If there's a domestic violence or a suicide ideation, whatever kind of a social problem is happening in the battalion, we're the ones who go in and deal with it. And then we obviously hold the services, but we have to provide for the free exercise for everybody. So not just Protestants. I mean, I had to make sure the Catholics were taken care of. I had to make sure if I had a couple of Wiccans in my battalion or in the brigade, I might talk to the brigade chaplain and say, I've got 3 Wiccans in my, I had a soldier come to me and he says, I need to find a covet. I said, what? a coven. He said, for satanic worship. And I'm like, well, let me check the phone book. It doesn't list any covens in the phone book. He says, well, you're my battalion chaplain, so you've got to find one. So I start asking questions. He comes back every day, where's my coven at? And I'm like, I haven't been able to find one. I apologize. And finally, a week later, he said, I found a coven. There's one in Junction City. I said, oh, okay. Well, can you give me a point of contact? And I'll write it down and keep it in my battle book. So if another, Satan worshiper wants to find a coven, I'll know where there is one. He said, no, I can't tell you. I said, why not? He said, well, it's secret.
Well, no wonder I couldn't find it.
What am I supposed to do? Go up at night and crawl through Junction City and find all the secret covens?
Yeah. Junction City used to be like the speeding ticket capital of the world.
That's where all the stab and jabs were.
Oh, is that where that? Okay, stab and jabs. Okay.
Where all the stab and jabs were.
Yeah, going from base to Junction City to Manhattan, there was a speed trap right there. I remember that in Junction City.
So the big thing is they teach chaplains collaboration without compromise. So they would never ask me to do something that was a clear violation of my faith. So, for instance, they would never make me. The perfect example would be in the Assemblies of God. I'm not allowed to do a marriage for someone who's been divorced. And whether you agree with that or not theologically, that's our denominational position. And since I was endorsed by the Assemblies of God, then they would not expect me to do something like that. And so what I would have to do then is find a chaplain who would be willing to do that. And so you made friends with other chaplains, and you had the baby baptizers and the non-baby baptizers, for instance. And
right.
What's funny is when I initially came in the Army and just come out of the Assemblies of God seminary and just pastored a Assemblies of God church, my theology was a lot tighter. But after working with other chaplains, serving on them with the battlefield, you begin to kind of ask people what things mean to them. So I think I told you about the time when one of my we had a 2-star general, his administrative assistant. I told you where she was killed.
Right.
I heard her was killed, and so she asked me to do a Catholic funeral. I'm like, I'm not allowed to do a Catholic funeral. And but she said, "But you're my pastor. I want you. You're my chaplain. I want you to do it." So I went to the priest, Father Carey. And I asked Father Carey, what makes something a Catholic funeral? And then he kind of explained, the holy water and the incense and all the certain prayers you pray. So I went back and I asked Patty, I said, well, tell me what the incense means to you. She said, well, that's our prayers going up before God. I said, well, we agree on that. Our prayers go up before God. I said, well, what does the holy water mean? She said, oh, that's God's protection. And then I read the prayers that she wanted me to read, and all of it was prayers that I was comfortable with. And so Father Carey took me over to the chapel and showed me how to light the incense and swing the little censer and how to do the holy water. And we did a funeral for that command. I did it for Patty. And I remember one of the moments in that funeral, after I'd done the holy water on the casket, or the water on the casket. And I would decide whether it's holy or not, but it was coming from me, it wasn't holy. Yeah. So I did the water on the casket. Well, she went over and draped herself over the casket and just began to weep. And so I turned to the congregation and I said, look, we're here to support Patty, to give her an opportunity to grieve and to encourage her faith, give her hope. I said, let's just take the next 5 minutes and let's just pray for her as a congregation. So I had mostly Catholics there. And they just, you could see them begin to pray for her. And then finally, after a period of time, she was like, okay, you can take the casket out. Afterwards, I got a lot of feedback from some of the Catholics that was one of the most meaningful funerals they'd ever been to.
You throw a little evangelical in with the rote tradition.
Blending of the traditions, taking the best from our different traditions that were consistent with Scripture.
So what was your responsibility or could you proselyte other faiths? I mean, knowing what you know about the gospel and you're called to share the gospel, were you encouraged to do that, not to do that? Like, was there a fine line in doing that of, the Wiccan? I'm thinking of the Wiccan, or someone who's Muslim, or, someone who's got some other funky religion.
My goal was, again, the paraclete,
Right.
as God who is beside me. Wherever I went, he was beside me. So you were bringing God into places to where he might not have otherwise been invited.
Mm.
So, just going right back to Fort Riley, Kansas, my very first assignment, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry. We were having a problem with our soldiers going down into Junction City, and they would fall in love with some of the strippers and the girls working the bars. And then when they would go to the field, the girl didn't quit her job. And so, soldiers were getting in fights with golf clubs. And so the sergeant major and the first sergeants came to me and said, Chaplain, you got to do something about this. And they said, why don't you do one of your soldier breakfasts? We'll do it for a company. We'll bring in a whole company of soldiers. I said, what, can I leave them on PT first? Can I stretch them out, take them on a run? And when we get back, you guys mermaid over the breakfast, and I'll do a class. I'll call it Living in a Sexy World. Mm. And they're like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, Chaplain. And so you would take the presenting problem, the social problem, and you would bring the gospel into it in a common sense way. Mm. And so I used to, without going into too much detail, I would put up a butcher board of, what are you looking for in a woman? And I'd picture one that the infantry would be like, yeah, Jeff, that's who I want. And then I'd say, really? Is that really the kind of woman you want? Or I said, would you really like maybe a long-term relationship with a healthy woman that you would respect to be the mother of your children? And they'd be like, well, yeah. I said, okay, let's list the traits of that kind of a woman. Where would you meet her? Would you meet her at a bar, or would you meet her in church? And they'd be like, probably church, Chaplain. And then I'd say, okay, here's the list of the woman. They helped me draw the list. I'd say, really tell me about a woman that you'd want to spend the rest of your life with and be the mother of your children. And they'd come through a list that would be right out of the fruit of the Spirit.
That's great.
And have it all there. Yeah. And then I'd say, okay, now, is there a switch that you flip as a young man that suddenly turns you into the kind of person that a woman would want? Because if she's going to be like that, what should you be like? And it would be the same kind of list. Mm. It'd be faithful, persevering, be a whole list of gentle and kind and thoughtful. And, they'd make that list. I said, do you flip a switch and become that person? To make a soldier, you don't just flip a switch. You got to go out and do PT every morning, train on your weapons, build the strength and the character and the courage to be a soldier. Same way with the father and a husband. You got to start building it now. Mm. And you could just see the light bulbs going on.
Right.
So you could bring the gospel into their lives in a very practical way. So no, I never felt a limitation.
Okay.
I wasn't going to get there saying, you need to accept Jesus today. Because they wouldn't even know what that meant.
Right.
The first thing I did in the field was I said, can I tell you a story so that you understand when I say God, you know what I'm talking about? Because they had no clue. Again, I think I shared this with you when we were going to the book of Acts. Mm-hmm. So should I repeat it for everybody else?
Yes, please share that. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I would just, I'd be in the field in Germany for 2.5, 3 months. We go to Hohenfels and go to the ranges. My poor wife would be left at home with both of our kids who were like 8, 2, and 4. And I'd come back and she'd be exhausted. So I'd send her off with her friends to go someplace in Germany and have some fun. They'd go whitewater rafting on the Danube River, or go to the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang Castle over in Neuschwanstein. Mm. So I'd watch my 2 kids. So I had been with them all day Saturday, from first time they woke up in the morning till now it's about 8 o'clock at night. I was exhausted, ready to go back to the field, eat MREs again, and sleep in bed. I mean, they were like little devils all day long. Dad, 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 dad. And so I finally got them to bed, and I had about an hour to myself. And now about 9 o'clock, I'm going to go to bed. Well, I walk into my kid's bedroom, and Chelsea, my daughter, had got out of bed and got into bed with Chase. And their heads were both on the pillow together. And there was light coming from the street lamp through the parted curtain windows, and it bathed their faces in golden light. They looked like two little angels after they had been devils all day long. And as I stood in the shadows of that room, it was such a strong feeling washed over me. And I looked and realized where there was no life, now there was life. Because of my love for my wife, these were these two little beings that were in my image. And I realized that there was no place I'd ever go in all creation where I wouldn't want to be their father. But I loved them. Even if they were serial killers, I would hunt them down, go into the prison and say, that's not who I created you to be. And so as I was thinking those thoughts, I literally felt Paraclete step up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder and say, Jerry, the way you felt about your children, that's the way I feel about you. That there's no place you'll ever go in all the creation, that I won't seek you out and find you, that you are in my image, that I gave you life. And that was, after all my theology, seminary, everything, that was the moment where I understood the heart of God. I have told that story to every soldier I have ever served in 28 years. And you'd be amazed at the ones that they will come back to you later and say, I never knew God was like that. And so that was I had to start. So am I trying to proselytize? Yes, I want them to know the heart of God. And did the Army ever tell me I couldn't do that? No, they were begging me to do that.
That's great.
And that became a starting point. That became a starting point for a conversation. And then you just respect the soldier's right to ask questions and move it in the direction they want to go.
That's good. So, what do you see, or what did you see? Like, statistics talk about, the I call them kids, but they're young men at 18 to 25 years old, and probably 75% of them didn't even have a dad. Probably higher percentage of that didn't even go to church, maybe a little spotty when they were younger. I know for me, matter of fact, I found my dog tags not too long ago, and I'd forgotten that I'd put them in a drawer, and actually my wife had them, and then my son wanted to wear them, and I was looking at the dog tags, and my religious preference was I didn't have one. I can't remember what they called the
soldiers would put their favorite beverage
on the dog tag. Yeah. So mine just said like none, or so, I can't remember what it said, but
no religious preference.
No religious preference. It said no preference. That's what it said. That broke my heart to think that, here I am 18, 19 years old, joining the Army, and I was training myself to be an atheist at the time. Going in, I graduated boot camp July 31st. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait August 2nd. I got married August 4th. I traveled to Fort Riley, Kansas August 6th. I got there, we got our place in Little Manhattan, Kansas. We went to the field for 45 days, like literally a week later. And, I just think back to, and then, everything just kind of went really, really fast starting the war. And I just remember thinking, now I'm thinking like if I would have died, I'd have been in hell. Like, I can't believe that, we're letting our young men and, the parents are allowing them just to go off like that and not giving some kind of guidance. Like, go ahead.
So that's a good segue into something that I want. That's a fabulous segue into something that I really wanted to hit on with you tonight, Colonel, because I don't ever watch the news, very little. Maybe I go on foxnews.com during the day and just kind of piddle around, but this what I'm going to talk to you about is not about this Ukrainian war, but what I'm noticing that I didn't notice. I was in the Air Force. I was stationed in Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. I was a cop. So I was in the
Gotcha.
security squadron, but I was on the law enforcement side.
Gotcha.
I went in 91. We deployed a bunch of people, not a bunch, but enough of the security forces to Desert Storm that
Yes.
there was enough of them that came back. And when I was young, I didn't notice any difference in their countenance. Right. But when I'm watching the news now and they're interviewing these people over in Ukraine, their faces are sunken in. They're pale. You can see that anxiety and worry and fear are overcoming them. Even the leader of the country doesn't look like he did 3 weeks ago. And so as I was researching you today, I saw an article from the Army back in like 2013. You were doing some suicide prevention training. And so I just kind of wanted you to comment tonight on what you saw during wartime. Obviously, the PTSD, there's a lot more science and stuff it is now, but to go along with what Jody said about not just counseling young men that don't believe, but also young men that may or may not believe that are going through a very, very, very trying time that really I don't think we're meant as human beings to go through.
Right. Something that we started, and again, I just know it from my experience. What came before me, I don't know. But at least by the early 90s, we were starting to do something called critical incident stress debriefings. And basically, as people were coming back from Iraq, even during the surge, before we would release them to go back to their families, they were required to go through these classes. So, for instance, after 9/11 happened, the mortuary affairs guys, military mortuary affairs, that had to go to New York and literally pick up the bodies and then match the bodies to personal effects like pictures and watches and stuff down at Dover Air Force Base. So we told them, don't ever do that again. Don't have the same guys that pick up the bodies go down there and match the bodies to the pictures. That was one of the things we learned from that. But since the mortuary affairs were trained and stationed out of Fort Lee, Virginia, and I was there, I was one of the chaplains who did the critical incident stress debriefings for those individuals. So what we would do is bring in a platoon-sized group of soldiers, roughly 24, 25 soldiers, and we would take them through what was called fact, thought, filling process. Have you ever heard that term? Did you ever go through that yourself? As a group, just talk about what happened. What did you see from your foxhole? And what happens is that helps you give a bigger picture, because not everybody sees the left flank or the right flank or what's going on. So you do, and you kind of get the whole group to say, okay, what are we missing? What do you need to put up there? And so that helps them get a common operating picture, a COP, where they can see what happened on the battlefield or what happened in New York when the buildings went down. So then you ask them to start talking about their thoughts, and you have to stop them from sharing their feelings, because they want to go right into feelings. You say, no, process your thoughts. Talk about what you were thinking. And that's where you begin to see anger, fear, anxiety, disappointment, frustration, sadness. You get a whole list of feelings. Or, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead.
Yeah.
You get them. The most common thing is anger. A loss of control. So you just get them to process their thoughts. And then you say, okay, let's explore feelings. And that can be tough, because sometimes people will get so upset that they leave the room, and we send a buddy with them. We have to have extra people there to go off with somebody and then bring them back to the group. So once we go through the event that happened, the thoughts and the feelings, then you say, that as a chaplain, you say, the thoughts and feelings are normal. What's not normal is the experience. You don't scrape bodies out of buildings most days of your life. You don't get up and get shot at. Friends, gapping. I had a chaplain who wound up with a unexploded rocket grenade in his side of his rib cage.
Wow.
And Yeah. I mean, not my chaplain assistant, another chaplain friend of mine is, that's not most Mondays. You don't have one of your friends have an unexploded grenade in their chest cavity.
Yeah, that's not normal daily life.
It's
Exactly.
not all day.
Yeah.
At least we hope it's not. Maybe if you live in some inner cities, but you're in Chicago.
Yeah.
But
Right.
so you really kind of really keep hammering that until they begin to realize there's nothing wrong with you because you're thinking these things and having these feelings. The despair and the anger and all of that, that's normal. And it's even okay to be angry at God. That's a normal. Look, you can show them in scripture. I'd show them here where they were angry with God. So I said, that's normal. What's not normal is the experience. Then you say, okay, how do you process it? What are some unhealthy ways to process it? And then they'll go through all the things that they're doing. They're going out, driving 100 miles an hour on a motorcycle. They're chugging beers every night, getting drunk. You can do the list of all the sins in the Bible, that are not healthy. That's what they're doing. And then you say, well, what are some healthy ways to process it? And that's where you get into go for a walk in nature, lift weights, go run and release healthy endorphins, pray, worship, read scripture, talk to somebody. So that was how we responded to the fact that just to show you how far it goes back, this is not new. When I came back from Desert Storm, I went to visit my Uncle Garland, who had been wounded in Normandy and in Italy in World War II as an infantryman with the Big Red One, Fort Riley, Kansas. And when I went to his house after Desert Storm, my wife and I went in, my Aunt Bee, my Uncle Garland, and he grabs me and says, hey, Jerry, let's go for a walk. And so we walk out his back door, across his farm, a couple of acres to get to some woods. It took us about 10 minutes to get there. He never said a word. We walked in total silence for 10 minutes. We got to the woods. He turned around me and hugged me, and he cried for 30 minutes. Sobbed, shook his body. And then he pushed me away. He looked at me. He says, Jerry, you understand. And then we walked back in total silence. So he'd been carrying that from 1945 until 1994.
Wow.
When I'd come back. That's how many years. So they suffered in silence, never had a chance. So we were recognizing what we call, I prefer the term post-traumatic stress reaction. Everybody has a post-traumatic stress reaction. Pastors live with post-traumatic stress reactions. That's a part of your life. Whether it becomes a disorder or not is all about whether you're processing in healthy ways. Are you taking a sabbatical? Do you have someone you can talk and pray with? Do you have healthy habits that help you release unhealthy toxins? So that becomes I blew out my thyroid in my years of service. I asked the doctor why. He grabbed my arm and he squeezed it. And he held on for a minute, and then we let go. It hurt. He says, you've been doing that for 28 years, dude.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah. He says, and that it's just same with cops, same with social workers,
right.
Same with pastors. There's a whole group of people who carry that in their bodies, and they have to find healthy ways to release it.
It's amazing how. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If you tie it to the people in Ukraine, they're having, it's that continual battle fatigue is just such a real thing. If you read Stephen Ambrose, Citizen Soldiers, he has a whole chapter to where, I'll just tell you one story to really grab it. There was this one soldier who had landed at Normandy, had been in continuous combat. Almost everybody in his company had already been replaced from either being wounded or killed. They had a new group of people come in, and now they were on their third group of new people, and he'd still survive. So he knew he could look around and say, wow, everything's been missing me. How did that happen? And so he was so tired of being sleepy, scared, hungry, stressed all the time. He said, I would give up my arm to get out of this. And so they're in the middle of a mortar attack. He loses his hand. The hand is blown off. It's a stump. He is jumping up and down in the middle of a mortar barrage saying, I get to go home. I only lost a hand.
It's crazy.
And everybody understood. They celebrate with him.
Golly.
That is battle fatigue. And that's what you're seeing in the face of those people.
Yeah, that's the two things that have stood out to me to the degree yesterday. I was at a church in Waco, and they just asked us to turn to the person around us and the people around us and pay for Ukraine and them. And I started praying and literally started sobbing in the middle of the prayer to the degree my wife had to finish the prayer on her own, and I just had and I didn't really understand what was going on, what the Holy Spirit was doing. But the more and more I watched, the two things that stand out to me is these people's freedom is being taken.
Yes.
And it bothers me deeply. And you've got all these people. It speaks to me spiritually, like when you walk down the street and you know the gospel and you don't preach it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody's standing around not doing anything, giving a Bible verse here. And what I mean by that is giving some munitions here, right? Giving a Bible verse here to deal with, but we're not really doing anything about the death or the ground that the enemy's taking when you choose not to evangelize. And then number two was just what we talked about, which was the battle fatigue that I see on these people's faces. Like their eyes get sunken in, and it's just, I don't know why God's pointing that stuff out to me. But it's hitting me very deep to the heart.
Here's what the Spirit just told me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the world without Jesus.
Yes.
Like the sunken in eyes and the face and the hopelessness and everything that we have right now, that's people without Jesus.
Yeah.
And so our battlefield is literally going out and sharing the gospel. Our battlefield is making sure that those people don't get to a place to where they're hopeless, and that's where the world is right now. That's our job to go out and do that. Just like it's the United States' job to come in somehow without starting World War III and helping Ukraine to an extent. I don't know what that looks like. I've been out of the military so long, I don't even know what we can or can't do or won't do. But I do believe, you look at what's going on right now, that NATO has come together in a way that I think will hinder Russia from doing a whole lot more anyway. But I really think that's that fear, that desperation, that hopelessness that we see in the rest of the world is a world without Jesus.
There's such a fascination right now with zombie stuff. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's entertainment, but it's spiritually. That's the reason why people like zombie stuff so much is because if you don't have Jesus in your life, you're a walking dead person. Mm-hmm. It's that's the way it speaks to me.
Right.
Is that we were born at enmity with God. We were born dead. And that's why there's such a fascination with it.
That's good.
So what you're getting at is the Christians have the opportunity for renewal.
Mm-hmm.
The unsaved do not. They can get parts of it. For instance, you would find those people, if you one of the ways you dealt with battle fatigue was you created a refuge, one terrain or two terrain features back from the forward line of battle so that they could get one good night's sleep without being afraid, get them some hot food, a hot shower. And so you would let them heal their physical needs, but you weren't healing their spiritual needs.
Yeah.
Christian, but see, here's the challenge with the Christian. Don't think that you don't need the sabbatical where you're giving yourself a good night's sleep, a hot meal, a hot shower, and a moment's rest, and renew your spirit.
That's
so because I have found, again, I blew up my thyroid. I have found that if I wasn't careful, I was renewing my spirit. But I mean, what happened when Jesus was touched by the woman with the hemorrhage?
Yeah.
He turned and said, "Who touched me?" Why? Because he felt power go out from him. And so as we serve others and we are being touched by the hurt and the needs of other people, power is going out from us. And so, if I learned anything as an Army chaplain was the importance of finding the foxhole, going down into it and being alone so that God could renew my spirit. But that would do no good That would do no good. I mean, I went to right here at Fort Campbell, not far from where I live right now. I went through the RIP course. We were patrolling all night long, and we went 17 days with almost no food, no sleep. Your physical body was just absolutely wiped out.
Yeah.
I mean, and so it would not have been enough to renew my spirit in that situation. There came a point where I had to rest my body. And so Christians shouldn't think that they still need to take care of those things.
So it's awesome that you just said that. So yesterday sermon was on 1 Corinthians 13, and it was the part 12 and 13 where it says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body through many are one body, or so it is with Christ. For in one spirit this is the verse, for in one spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one spirit." And what this pastor did yesterday was he hit on baptized being immersion, not talking about physical baptism, but talking about how we are immersed into the Holy Spirit, right? We are put into the Holy Spirit. But just because you're put into something, it takes time to become saturated, which he hit on that word with the word drink. So now you're immersed, but you keep drinking to get saturated. And he actually used a sponge and put a sponge in the water and said, when this sponge first goes in, it's wet, it's immersed in the water, but it's not saturated yet. Yeah. And that's why God wants us to continue to drink. And that just came into my mind because he's talking about how we need to, refuel ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Get filled back up.
Yeah. It's a constant filling. You gotta continue because I love what you said a while ago. It's the power going out of you. I never thought of it that way. Like, discipling and counseling and, encouraging and chastising sometimes. Like it's exhausting and it gets tiring and
death notifications.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, one of the toughest things I did in the Army was over the course of my career, I did 150 death notifications where you knock on somebody's door and you give them the worst you could ever get.
Wow.
And then usually you're going with the casualty assistance officer who's never done it before. So it's their first time. You got some sergeant or a new lieutenant, they've been in the Army less than a year, and here they are driving out to Richmond, Virginia, going out in the country, knocking on the family's door. And so they get back in the car. Well, they do a meltdown. Well, I want to do a meltdown. I want to meltdown. But now I've got to help this the first time they've done it,
right?
And I've got to help drive back for an hour, 2 hours. One time we found out that we notified a family, the wife, that her son had been killed. And then they called us and said, are you guys aware that on his DD-214 that he's got a father? They're divorced. We're like, well, you didn't tell us that. They said, well, he's somewhere in the county, he's in a prison. He's in jail. We're like, well, which one? They said, no. So we started driving to different jails and asking, is Mr. So-and-so here? And finally, the third one we hit out in the middle of no place, the guy was there. So we have to go back into his cell and tell him that his son was killed in combat.
Oh, my goodness.
And then he's like, well, can I go to the funeral?
Yeah. Like, how do you answer that? That's not even your choice. Yeah.
I went to the warden I said, I asked the guy that took me back, can I go see the warden? I go see the warden. I said, sir, is there any way? We'll get a military escort. We'll take this guy there in chains with weapons on him. He's like, no, we can't do that.
Oh my goodness.
And so in that situation, I did the only thing I could do. And whenever you do the notification, you don't do the funeral. Another chaplain does, because we found once again, it was too much to do the notification followed by doing the funeral later. And so I did 150 separate funerals from the 150 death notifications, but they were different sets of people.
Oh my goodness.
And so for this one guy, I broke the rules and I went out to the prison and, we went and had a little memorial there in his cell to where I, communion and, we did scripture reading, prayer, and let him talk it through, just a little Rogerian kind of counseling, let him, but still, when he wanted to see physically touch the casket, see the body go down into the ground. And
wow.
So again, something goes from you. I was watching We Were Soldiers, Once and Young with Mel Gibson.
Yes.
There's the scene to where the wives are going, they see the mailman delivery.
Yeah, the mailman and the taxi driver pulling up. Yes.
And so the wives go and they do the notification. And I'm watching that. I'm stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And I'm in about 22 years into my career. And I'm watching that. And I just go absolute fetal position. I fall into the floor in the living room, roll up into a ball, and just start sobbing. And Pam goes down and just puts her hand on me and just starts praying for me. And she lets me just cry for 30 minutes. And because it had that had been going out for me, all those different events.
So that's a great question. How did you, as the chaplain, pull your own cops on your own life? You're talking about the cops, just going through that process. How did you pull that, number one, in your own life? And then number two, how did you not take your wife down with you in the process? And how did you allow her to, journals. Okay. I love it.
I've got 28 years worth of journals down here, plus my 2 years pastoring.
No kidding.
Everybody's different. And so for me, it's my journaling, music, exercise. And then I have chaplain friends who we've had some of the common experiences together, and we'll tell stories and laugh.
You got to laugh. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what I can tell you. And can I tell the Kentucky story?
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, tell that.
Please don't tell a Kentucky story.
We got to have a Kentucky story.
I'm just
joking.
So we're out in Germany, and we're at the ranges qualifying our Bradleys, and now we're doing table 12, which is where you do your platoon firing. Well, there's a cook out there who grew up on a farm in Kentucky, and he could make the sounds of all the animals on the farm having intercourse. The pigs, the donkeys, the cows, the horse, everything. He could make sounds, and I'd be laughing so hard I was crying. And so, since I was always at that range, when each company would come through, I'd just sleep out there and wait for the company to come through, and that way I could see everybody hold a service. I knew they were under a lot of stress doing qualifying day and night fire. And so then they'd all gather for their meal, and I'd call that guy over. It's the chaplain causing the trouble. I'd call him over. Okay, tell him about the farm in Kentucky. And he would do that for the company. They would just, we would just, it was funny.
Right.
It wasn't that funny, but when you've been going, again, you're under stress.
Yeah.
An austere environment, things are just funnier.
Mm-hmm.
I always say to Jody, Kentucky, where the men are men and the sheep are scared. Right.
Yeah, because I'm from Kentucky. I think I told you that. I grew up in Murray, Kentucky. So, yeah.
So you have a million of those kinds of stories.
Right.
We get together and we share them, and it's very cathartic. In fact, Dave Giammona, which I'm going to recommend, Chaplain Dave Giammona, who just wrote the book, it's about preparing for the end times. It's basically a soldier's guide for the end times, something like that. Dave Giammona, he's here in Nashville. I'm going to meet with him on Wednesday, and we're going to tell war stories because Dave and I served together for, he was 30 years. He's a retired colonel. And but when we get together, we kind of apologize to the wives because we'll go down a rat hole and just start telling stories. All my uncles who were preachers, they'd get together. We'd be out underneath the weeping willow. They'd get together and start telling stories of like one time they were doing a baptism during kind of the hippie times, and some guy puts the white robe on and has nothing underneath it, gets down into the water. Woo! The whole church gets the view. And they just start telling those stories, and you're just,
that's great. So that's a good point. Like, camaraderie, number one, and having somebody in your life that you can talk to and laugh with, and share the ups and downs of that. One of the things that I felt in the military was alone. Even though I was with 160 other guys and, doing training and sleeping out in the tents. And, I drove an M3 Bradley for my commander, my captain. And, we had 3 guys in that, and it still felt lonely. It was almost like I was too young to understand or to communicate and have a conversation. So I didn't understand that, but I did have a captain that was really good at, just talking and, getting to know the stories and all of that. And so I think that's huge. As a pastor, I have those men in my life to be able to there's some of them, Ben's one of them that he and I can talk about anything. And then we can talk about theology, and that's a cool thing to be able to do, because it's not always about, scripture and discipleship and training. Like it's,
the Band of Brothers. Gordon MacDonald, in his book Ordering Your Private World, talks about the importance. And Swindoll, you go to any book, and they will talk about the importance of that band of brothers,
right? Which
is kind of what this podcast becomes. You have men talking about some of the challenges we've faced. So there's one story I got to tell you.
Good,
because it ties into this whole. And this was at Fort Riley, Kansas. This was one of the craziest moments of my early Army career. It's a Friday night. That week, I had gotten more insurance. I doubled my life insurance because I now had 2 kids, and I just thought, this job, bad things could happen.
Right.
And I wanted to know my wife to be taken care of. So that week, I get more life insurance. I get home Friday night. I get a frantic call from my battalion commander. He says, Chaplain, where are you at? I said, sir, I just got home. He said, I need you back up at Charlie Barracks. We got a hostage situation. One of our sergeants up there has a gun, and he's got the company stood off at gunpoint. I need you to go up there and talk to him. I'm like, all right, sir, Roger. And I turn to my wife. My wife says, what's going on? I said, they need me back at work. She can read. She knows it's more than that, but I'm not going to tell her, So I hop in the car, and I'm praying as I'm driving up there. So I pull out the parking lot of Charlie Company Barracks, and there's a SWAT team circling the building. So I get out of my car, and I go over to one of the young soldiers, and I said, what are you guys trying to do? What's going on? He says, I got a guy under a gun. We're trying to find a window, and we're trying to take him out. I said, I've been told I need to go in and talk to him, and I really don't. I'm wearing the same uniform as him, same haircut, and we're probably both as ugly. And so I don't want you to mistake us. He said, well, sir, I can't do that. I said, well, take me to who's in charge. Take me to your commanding officer. So he takes me over to this young lieutenant, and it's Friday night. He's all got his battle rattle on. He's all excited because he may get to shoot somebody, And I'm like, I've been told to go in there. I need you to pull your guys back. Oh, no, sir, I can't do that. I said, well, then you're going to have to go in and do it. Because I said, I'm not going in there if you guys are locked and loaded, trying to shoot through a window. He's like, oh, okay. So he pulls everybody. And I said, okay, I'm going in there. If he shoots me, you can go in and get him. But give me a chance to talk first. So now I go up to the double doors, and the company commander, and I won't say his name because he sometimes is on TV talking, and I want to know who it was. So the company commander's outside the barracks doors, and inside I hear somebody yelling. And the captain says, hey, Chaplain, do you think I ought to go in and talk to him? I'm like, well, who's he mad at? He says, oh, well, he's mad at me. And I'm thinking, I don't really like you that much. So, yeah, you go in and talk to him. Maybe I better go with him. So I open the double doors, and there's this long hallway wall to my left, and to my front is the CQ, the desk. There's a soldier there, Stanley Snipes. He's this muscled up, hardened Vietnam War vet guy. And so I walk down the hallway, and I hear around the hallway where I know there's a setting area, I hear this guy yelling. And so my heart rate's starting to go up a little bit. And then I stop at the corner of the wall, not yet stepping out where the guy can see me. And the sergeant major looks over at me. And I hear the young guy saying something stupid like, well, go ahead, just shoot me, get it over with. And I'm thinking, oh, let's don't escalate this. And so the sergeant major kind of looks over at me and he kind of rolls his eyes like, what are you going to do, Chaplain? Just stand there and wet your pants? Or are you going to, I'm thinking, I'll just stand there and wet my pants.
Exactly.
So finally I kind of work my courage up and I step out and I raise my hands up in the air. And this sergeant, Buck Sergeant, locks this nickel-plated Colt 45 on my chest at about 20 paces. And it looks like a 105 howitzer.
Yeah.
I bet it was.
I'm thinking, oh. And so I say something, and then so he's to my front. The CQ now and the sergeant major are just off to my right. And then kind of over to the left, about 6, 7 soldiers that were watching TV, but they're not watching TV anymore.
Right.
So that's the group of people. And so I say something really intelligent, like, you're really upset, aren't you? Well, I'm smart. I spot those things right away. And so, I try to get him to start telling me what he's upset about. And, he keeps saying life's not fair. And he's telling me about his father, who was a first sergeant, who they didn't have a good relationship. He was going through a messy divorce with his wife, and he was having problems with chain of command. And he just, I'd get him calmed down. And about the time I get him calmed down, somebody would move. Mm. And then he would swing his gun, start pointing at them, start yelling again, and then swing it back at me. And after that happened about 3 times, I was like, I have got to get closer to him and get him just talking to me. So I'm kind of praying, I need wisdom right now. And so I say, do you mind if I take my BDU top off so I can come closer to you? And he looks at me and, well, why do I want to take my BDU top off? He's mad at a captain. I'm wearing captain's rank.
Right.
And he's mad at authority. I'm an officer in the Army. And so I also want to show him I don't have a weapon. And so I take off my BDU top now. And so he lets me come closer. Now we're at about 5 paces. He's still got the gun on me. And he keeps repeating the same things and getting angry, but at least he's calmer now and just talking to me. And so in that situation, there's one thing I'm looking for. What do you think that is? See, now I'm being the professor.
Okay.
What's the one thing I'm looking for?
An opening to grab the gun.
A seed.
No, I'm looking for a resource.
Okay.
What is a resource? Now I'm going back to my suicide prevention training that I've had in the Army multiple times. You're looking for someone or something that they care more about than the pain of life. And in this case, he tells me, I'm asking questions, in the middle of him saying life's not. I say, yeah, I agree with you. Life's not, this week I was at the hospital where a 2-year-old child was dying of cancer. So yeah, I agree with you. Life's not fair. Mm. And then I find out that he has a son. He has a 5-year-old son. Now, and I ask him, do you love your son? And he gets mad at me. Like, what? I should shoot you, Chaplain. Do I love my son? I said, well, look, I've been to the hospital where kids were abused by their parents. So I don't assume everyone loves their kids in the same way that I love mine. So I'm just asking. And he says, yes, I love my son. There it is.
There it is. Yeah.
The Holy Spirit's like, you got him. And so I just said, look, I understand your relationship with your company commander, your wife, your dad. And I'll be honest with you. It's not fair. Life shouldn't be that way. But I said, I can't fix that. And I said, I'm not sure you can either. But I said, there is one thing you control. If your son grows up without a father, that's not fair. Mm. You control that. Right here, right now, you control that. And then he dropped the weapon, chambered, kicked the rounds out. The most beautiful music in the world was when those shells
they're hitting the floor. I could imagine. Oh.
Yeah. And then I wrapped him in a bear hug, and he cried. And so that was my introduction in the Army.
Wow.
Welcome to.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can talk to any chaplain who's ever served anywhere, and they all have 100 soldiers, 100 stories that march right alongside.
Just like that, yeah. So you're in a system that is designed for high stress.
Yes.
And just about from the day that you
stress.
Yeah,
You train for high stress.
Right, exactly. I mean, literally from the moment you meet your recruiter, like that's high stress. They're on you, and they're like used car salesmen, and they're trying, and I even remember telling my drill sergeant, my senior drill sergeant, that my recruiter lied to me, because he told me wherever I went to do my boot camp is where I'd probably get to do my duty station. And I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for my boot camp, and I did the combined AIT and boot camp, and so it was like 4 months long. And then I got, and this is a pretty good story, I got my duty station was for Germany. But I'd only joined for 2 years, the College Army Option Program. So I couldn't take my wife, and I was the typical, I fell in love with my wife in college, but I was flunking out of college. So I joined the military so I could keep my wife, or my girlfriend at the time. But I was the stereotypical guy getting married in between boot camp and, my duty station.
Me too.
Yeah. Did you do the same thing?
Before boot camp.
Before boot camp.
Like, got married 7 days later, was in.
So, oh, wow. And so I didn't want to go to Germany without her, and the only way that I could take her with me was to join for another 2 years.
Yeah.
And so while I'm in boot camp, I'm in like 3.5 months. I'm at 3 months, maybe 3.5 months. So I'm close to graduating boot camp. My mom, or my girlfriend's mom and dad were pretty well connected. As a matter of fact, they were well connected enough to get Senator Paul Simon, who was the head of the Arms Committee at the time.
He was
a senator, yes.
Oh, singer.
No. Paul, what is it? Not Paul. No, it's Paul Simon. Oh, no, yeah, the bow tie guy. Do you remember the bow tie guy?
No.
But he was a senator at the time in Illinois, who was also a head of the Arms Committee.
Oh, okay.
Well, unbeknownst to me, while I'm in boot camp, they get my duty station changed. He owed my in-laws a favor for something. I have no clue what it was about. My father-in-law was the president of the Coal Miners Association, so no telling what he was high up there. But anyway, make a long story longer, I literally get a call from my captain. Once it was a Sunday afternoon, I'll never forget, because I went to church on Sunday, so I didn't have to, do my clean up my barrack and all that kind of stuff. So it was right after church, and I heard down the hall, PFC Burkeen front and center. And so I run down the hallway. And again, I'm standing at the door, and I see my senior drill sergeant. Well, I could have swore it was my captain yelling, but there was my senior drill sergeant. So I walk in the office, and as I walk in the office, the door shuts behind me. And so there's my senior drill sergeants and the 2 other drill sergeants that were in my face all week long. And there's my captain sitting at the table. And I thought, I am dead meat. I don't even know what I did. I've got my 3 drill sergeants, my captain. My captain just killed, like he started cussing me up and down. So he said, I've never, ever had to talk to a senator in my life. And here I am talking to this senator and this and blah. And all of a sudden he started talking about the chain of command. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, I didn't have anything to do with this. So I'm standing at ease, and I start talking with my hands, and I pull my hands out like that. And my senior drill sergeant said, I think you just tried to hit the captain, and grabs me by the throat. And here I am up on the wall, and they had me scared to death. So I still had 4, 5, 6 weeks, I don't even remember what it was, left. And their goal was just to make me miserable. Like, I think I was number 1 in the platoon with all my PT and my training and all this. And by the time I left, I think I was like number 10. But they during Hell Week, They took CS canisters and put them in my tank. They stole my M16, and they just made my life miserable. And so graduation day, here I am. I got my beautiful wife coming. I got my whole family coming, and I'm on the front row because my last name's ends with a B. And here comes the captain and the senior drill sergeants, and they're all going down the line. And they shake your hands and hand you your diploma and your orders and all that kind of stuff. And I kid you not, my senior drill sergeant, my captain passed by me, and he kind of punched me in the chest and all this. My senior drill sergeant grabs my hand and he pulls me to where his mouth is at his mouth is at my ears, and he goes, "I know people at Fort Riley, Kansas." And he pushed me back, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's gonna kill me at Fort Riley, Kansas. So that was the story of my boot camp years. That the stress that I had from that was the whole point, was just the stress. And then here I go into Fort Riley, Kansas, August 6th, getting ready to go to war. And it was so much more stress there, but it's crazy how you have to deal as a chaplain, because you're really the one that's dealing with every issue that comes along with the guys in your battalion. And you're talking a bunch of guys that are young and dumb and, really confused and really stressed, that are making some dumb decisions.
You mentioned the fact that a lot of them are coming in without healthy parental role models, especially among the enlisted. Now, what I did find was that there were more officers coming in from two-parent families, because they were able to kind of provide education. And so I did find that when we did field services, when I was focused on the individual enlisted soldiers, out of 100, I might get 10.
Right.
But when into the officers, I might have 20 officers that were, for instance, when we had a summer camp for all of our ROTC, the Army ROTC cadets would come to Fort Riley, and I was assigned to be the regimental chaplain. Naturally, I didn't have enough to do as a battalion chaplain, pastor of the youth program, preaching a chaplain, but they also had regimental chaplain out over the summer.
Speaking of stress, they're just going to burn you out.
They were going to burn me out. I mean, one time I'm sitting at the table, and I'd come back from the field visiting my regiment where I did a service, 20 officers. I had 14 come. I'm like, what? I was expecting out of 20 to have 2 or 3. I had 14. So they were coming out of a more, they've been higher emotional intelligence.
Yes.
From their family of origins. That's what those observations, you mentioned that earlier, that percentage of people who come to services.
Well, and they're kind of the barrier between you and the enlisted guys. Like, if you're having to deal with the enlisted guys, it's because the captain or the lieutenant couldn't figure out what the crap they were supposed to do, and so they're pushing them off onto you, it seems like. So there. Well,
and a good chaplain is PTing with the soldiers.
Right.
In fact, going back to Timothy McVeigh, I mean, we were doing a 12-mile road march, EIB road march, and I started at the back of the formation, and then I just walked and ran so I could work through every company till I got to the front. And when I came to Charlie Company, Timothy McVeigh, who was the first sergeant's driver, first sergeant of Greece, who was an atheist, by the way. And so as I'm walking by Timothy McVeigh, I didn't know him yet.
Right.
It was only later when the company called me and told me what happened, that after the war, it happened. And by then I was in another unit. But anyway, he wouldn't talk to me. Everybody else would talk to me, at least, I'd tell me where they were from, why they joined the Army. I'd find out, did they have a girlfriend? Just, chat them up and find out how everything was going. And just by being present, they'd see me at PT. They'd see me when I did the company, living in the sexy world, or the spiritual dimension of personal finance. I was always coming up with some class that I figured, this is the struggle. Here's how we bring the gospel into it. So they knew me, and they would reach out to me. I stayed pretty busy all week long with soldiers coming through my office, because I was approachable. And I wasn't what was called an officer's chaplain. You have some chaplains who maybe their fathers. I had a chaplain friend whose father was a general, and he just kind of where my dad was a non-commissioned officer in the. So I had a great respect for the non-commissioned officers. I knew they were strong leaders. Some of them were great men and women. Some of them were not. And it was my mission in life. They didn't realize, the bad ones didn't realize that the battalion commanders and the company commanders would pull me aside and say, "Okay, chaplain, tell me the rest of the story."
Oh, wow.
Because if you ever read the book, The 7 Habits of Effective People by Covey, in it, he has a chapter in there about production and production capability, how a strong leader not only can produce, but can also take care of the equipment. Right. In this case, the soldiers. So you'd have some commands that would come in, company commander, first sergeant, platoon sergeants, who would produce, but they would wipe out their soldiers.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they would work 70 hours a week and just break up their families, and there'd be suicide attempts and all kinds of things. And then you have another company who did really well, but not as high as Alpha Company. Bravo Company did well, Alpha did better. So Alpha must deserve the 1 blocks and their better OERs. I go see the commander. I say, "Sir, pull out their profile and let's see how many people re-enlisted from that company." "Oh, you mean half of Bravo Company re-enlisted, and out of Alpha Company only 10% re-enlisted? How much domestic violence was there in Alpha Company?" "Oh, there were 6. How many in Bravo? Only 1?" And then the company commander or the battalion commander would say, "Oh, so he's wearing out. He's not good for the Army long term." I said, "No, sir. Strategically, he's not. He's real good at short race, but we got to run mile after mile after mile. We got to be in combat for a long time." And so they didn't realize that I was helping keep the good NCOs and officers in the Army and get the bad ones put out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I never thought that you could. I mean, you really can see a good leader, especially in the military, based on all of those things that you were talking about, like domestic violence and burnout and re-enlistments and all of that. That's cool.
My first battalion, I had one of the first sergeants meet me at the door to his barracks at his company and tell me, he said, "Chaplain, you're not welcome here. I don't want to see you down." I said, "You don't look like God. You don't smell like God."
I love it. I love it.
"You just made sure I'm going to be down here every morning and every night before I go home. You'll be the first and last stop of my day because I'm going to find out what you're doing down here where you don't want me around."
Wow. That's great.
Yeah, you guys are talking about all your Army stories. Just so you know, we had tablecloths in our chow halls in the Air Force. And I did do basic training and my tech school at the same in San Antonio. And so after that, because if an Air Force base is attacked, the security squadron is the one that's got to defend the base. We went to Air Base Ground Defense training in Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
When I got there, the first memory I have was us going to the chow hall, and we had to stand elbow to elbow and move sideways. And, the Army guys, they're probably being harder on us than they even are their own guys because we're the Air Force. I'm thinking to myself, what is wrong with these people? These people are crazy. I'm sitting at a stainless steel table. Right. This, that, and the other. But on a more serious note, so we, in the military, I was only in for 4 years, but saw a lot of marriages wrecked. Just saw a lot of the things the guys were dealing with. Did you? I know you were involved in teaching and training about suicide prevention and this, that, and the other. But were you also having to deal with it on the other side with having to deal with actual suicide and yes, things like that?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, again, time doesn't allow us to go into some of these, but I had a sergeant who was sexually abusing his 2 stepdaughters. And he didn't, I got called to the hospital, and it was pretty evident after going down and meeting the mother and the 2 daughters that, in fact, they had been sexually molested. So I called the first sergeant, First Sergeant Reese. It was his company, Charlie Company, and the one that had Timothy McVeigh.
Right.
And I said, where's the soldier? And they said, well, he wasn't at formation this morning. And so I said, well, when's the last time you saw him? And then I said, we need to get out to his house. We went out there. His vehicle was there. Door was locked. So we had to call them, the MPs, military police. You guys came in and helped us. We had to go upstairs, and he'd taken a shotgun blown off his head.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, I mean, that hard to go to sleep that night, because not only did you talk to young girls who had been sexually abused by their stepfather,
right?
You had to go see that, and then the battalion commander wouldn't let us do a funeral. On the soldier. He said he doesn't deserve that.
Doesn't deserve. Oh my goodness! Holy cow!
Like, sir, we still got to address it, and then I later had to meet his father and his brothers, and they wanted to blame him for what happened.
Wow.
So you're with all of that. So then you're dealing with the counseling, the domestic violence abuse. It's not the social worker, because we're embedded in the battalion. We're the ones that they would come to.
Wow.
And I'd go to bed every night, and I had a list of people who I knew were at risk for suicide. That I had contracts with them that they would call me. You either had to take them physically
right
to the hospital, and they didn't want to go, and so you had to make them do a contract with you, saying that they weren't going to hurt themselves that night. And then you would have to call in a couple of friends. You'd ask, who's a couple of your friends that you trust, and then you would call those friends in and say, we want you to keep an eye on him before we leave on the weekends. We want you to look him in the eye and ask him how he's doing. What we found out was the breakup with the girlfriends.
Yeah.
So we had one guy, every time he broke up with a girlfriend, was a suicide risk. So these guys knew to tell me, so they'd call me Friday night. Oh, Chaplain, he broke up with his girlfriend on Thursday. Everybody get down there. Don't let him drink alone this weekend. Tell him this whole week. And then I'd see him on Monday, and he'd be alive. But you'd go to sleep hoping you didn't make a mistake.
Right. Yeah. I can't imagine. So I just read an article the other day, and it talked about there have been more suicides during this Afghan war than there were actually military men who died in the war.
Yes.
We've got a few more minutes, before we end the podcast here. Could you? And I know there are men that not only are in our group. We've got over 30,000 men in a group only through Man Up God's Way that will be listening to this podcast and probably listening right now. We have 878,000 followers on our main Facebook page that I know will be listening to this as well. And so what would you, or how would you suggest that, whether they're in the military or not, deal with or cope with suicidal thoughts or a depression that just brings them so low that, we understand our military guys are going through some major PTSD and, they're major stress, and they've seen their friends die, and they've, watched people get killed and all this. But that same PTSD is slowly but surely infiltrating secular society to a point where, right now, since COVID and the lockdowns and all of this kind of stuff, suicide rates have jumped dramatically. Drug addiction, alcohol, all of this has increased substantially. In your wisdom, what would be some help? What would be some guidance for people that are at the end of their rope, so to speak?
Scripture says, if you want to find your life, you give it away. We had a soldier in Germany who didn't want to be alone at Fort Leonard Wood for boot camp, talked to his wife and child to come up and see him during the winter, during the Christmas break. He had black eyes, killed him. So this soldier would go down into bombholder Germany and get beat up at the bars because he felt like he should be punished, because in his mind, he killed his own kids. So they brought him to the chaplain because they tried to fix it a couple of times at company level. Finally, they sent him to me. I got the story of what happened. There was a orphanage that had a boy and a girl who had lost their parents in a car wreck. And so I got with the chain of command and said, does he have permission to one day during the workday take half of the day and go to that orphanage and get to know those two kids? And so they said yes. I called him in and said, will you go see these two kids? We want you as an American soldier to go see those two kids. And he went, and then every couple of weeks I'd check on him. Eventually he fell in love with those kids. He met a German girl, married her, adopted those kids. And the last I heard, he was a first sergeant in the Army. Wow. What's the principle? You find your life by giving it away. Those who have been raped find life by beginning to work with people who have been raped. People who have had miscarriages, help those who have had miscarriages. When Jesus spoke to Peter, Peter says, Satan has demanded the right to sift you. But when I'm praying that you don't lose all your faith, and when you return, strengthen your brothers. What's the principle? The broken legs of our life, the pain of our life becomes bridges to help other people. Don't isolate. Don't become self-absorbed, but ask the question, how do I serve others with my pain? And you will find life. Christ will help you find life.
Yes,
I've seen that.
Amen.
Those who will take a step in their pain, help them take a step. Sometimes people can't even get a drink of water. So you say, stand up, take one step, take a second step, bend down, drink the water, take a step back, go back and sit on the bed, get some rest. So it's our job to help. I worked with a girl who had been raped in Annapolis with her and her husband. We met every other week for about 6 months. I won't tell you all about it, but she had a nervous breakdown. But there came a point to where from her pain, she was able to do incredible. And so if you listen to people's stories,
right,
overcome evil with good. But that's the principle. It really is. We don't. It's true for all of us.
That's so
it's
good.
Not hurt. Even the healthy. Why do millionaires commit suicide? Why do read Ecclesiastes? Why do people lose everything? Because without that service to others, and why did God create us and love us? That's who He is. And if we don't do that, we're not living the life that God created us to live. It's a reflection of who He is. That's why, again, it's all about. It ain't about trying to be happy. It's about the service.
And it goes both ways too. It's Job's buddies got it right the first time.
Yes.
When they listened and they prayed. And so
yes.
On the other side of it, meaning giving our lives up to somebody that is struggling and,
yes.
Being that ear to lean on and not trying to fix it. And, now that Jody asked that question, something you said earlier in the podcast resonated with me when you got all the guys together and you were doing the suicide prevention training and you were asking the guys about, what are the facts and, what did you think and how did you feel? It brought me to the memories of like our men's breakfast. Like we have a thriving men's ministry here. And it amazes me how many churches don't have one. They don't have the church I was at this Sunday was a phenomenal church. Didn't have a men's ministry. It bewilders me, but these men at this men's breakfast, they just open up their lives. Like Jody a lot more than me, but I've had personal conversations with these guys. Some of them had never heard any of this, but you get them in a group and they start to look around the room that he's not that much different than me. And, that's my story too. It's amazing what you can do in that group environment with these guys.
Yes. Yeah.
That's good.
Just for clarification, those were called critical incident stress debriefings.
Okay.
They weren't necessarily, we would identify out of 25, we might have 2 or 3 people who have suicide risk. But the focus was on the fact that everybody is going through, everybody has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Yes.
We all have in common as brothers in Christ. If we went around with every one of us, there'd be something in life where we have a weakness, we have a struggle. Christ didn't die because we were perfect. He died because He knew we were going to struggle. We do that. And there has to be that place of account, trusting people. I've been a pastor, a chaplain. I've served soldiers and families, but nonetheless, only by the grace of God am I not gone. You know?
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, brother, you don't know how much that.
Just saying, we all struggle, and we all need each other's prayer and support.
Yes, exactly. Well, this I can't believe it's already been 2 hours, man. This was a great conversation, and I love your heart. I love your story. I appreciate all that you've done for me and my class, and I look forward to a future friendship that we can glean off of. And again, thank you for your service, and thank you for your continued service in the kingdom. And we love you, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Nice to meet you, Colonel.
Amen.
Nice to meet you.
All right, brother. Have a great night.
Standing with the Air Force.
There you go. All right, brother. Well, we'll talk to you later, and have a good one. God bless. Bye-bye. All right. Well, that was an awesome night.
Yeah.
And I love him. I love his stories. I love hearing war stories. And if there is anybody out there that is struggling, whether you've been in the military or not, with suicide, please get help. Please find a friend to talk to. Call the 800 suicide prevention number. It's easy to find. Ask somebody on Facebook. Just find help. The easiest, that's the easiest way to not do that. It doesn't take away the pain. It only transfers it to the people that are left here.
Yeah,
So,
don't believe the enemy's lies that you're alone, or that you couldn't rely on a friend or somebody to help you if you were transparent and shared with them your struggle. So that's a lie from the enemy. And the closer you get to telling somebody and bringing it to light, the more he's going to work against you. So just do it.
Amen. Well, guys, have a great night. We're going to call it a night, and we will see you on next Monday. Be sure to download the podcast tomorrow on any podcast platform.
You've been listening to the Man Up God's Way podcast. Visit us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and our website at manupgodsway.org.